got to be careful what you read. God might insist that you learn it.
Hey, when we were talking about wisdom, and you were like, "There's no wisdom apart from death and resurrection wisdom." I was like, "Let me stop asking for that. Let me stop asking for it. I just got done with the death. I don't even know if I've been raised yet. Let me
I
stop."
remember I was brand new Christian, just baptized at a Bible study. My uncle is a pastor, and he was teaching Bible study, and he said, when you're young, you should start praying for wisdom because you don't know yet what you're praying for.
Mm,
So he
mm.
said because wisdom, then that's where I learned that wisdom is a death and resurrection thing. So he said, but pray for it, and God will start. Uh, he said God promises to answer when you pray for it, right? Ask for wisdom, and I will give it. I'll give it to whoever who asks. He says, but you're asking um, for a death and resurrection. And so he's the same. So when I was leaving to go pastor, this is the last person I met with. I met with my uncle, and then the gentleman who had been my youth pastor for years, and my uncle said, when God has truly called you to the ministry, when you get ordained, he will take everything else away so that you trust in only him and you actually minister by faith. And he was right.
Huh.
So you're always tempted to turn everything into a works thing. You're always going to be tempted into thinking like, I just got to get the system right. I just got to get. It's like, but
Yeah.
when
No,
you're
that's
truly
real.
called, God will just keep taking everything away until you're only trusting in Him, and then you're doing it by faith and not by works. And some of the
You know
best
what?
advice I ever got.
You don't get that. You don't get out of that just because you don't go in the ministry either. Like that still becomes
Oh
a
yeah,
part of your
no, for
Christian
sure.
life. You know, it still becomes a part of your sanctification.
And it's
So
not and what I liked about it, the way he put it, is that it's not a negative thing. Like we tend to think like, oh, God took that because it's an idol. God took that, and we put a negative spin on everything rather than God took God took that because He's enough, right?
mm,
And he's showing me He's enough. He's showing this is the same uncle. He did my I owe him a lot. Bill Farley. His books are really good too. If he's got he had a book that was book of the year for World Magazine on uh, living the grateful Christian life. It's really good. Um, but yeah, and he had a book. He was the first. He was the one. He's a Baptist pastor, but he's the one that introduced me to. He's got a book on raising kids according to the gospels, God, raising kids by faith and not by works. It's really good. And he's got a book that's but he had a book on covenant succession, and but he said too many people were becoming Presbyterian, so he pulled it to figure out he had to figure out
what was
what
I
it
doing?
was. Well, what it was, because he's like, it's scriptural, right? He introduced me, and so he's a guy that's like, well, the Bible says it, so we believe it. And he's a
Yep. Yep.
convicted Baptist. He's got Baptist convictions, but not, but also the convictions about what God says about our kids, right? And it holds them together. And he's yeah. But I was like, man, that book on covenant succession is fantastic. All the Presbyterians over here are reading it. He's like, yeah, running into that.
You know what's funny? I became a Presbyterian because of Todd Frio, who's a Baptist. I don't think Todd would consider himself even Reformed Baptist, maybe. Well,
Yeah.
I asked Todd one time, we were at the studio. I asked Todd one time, I said, "Are you a Calvinist?" He's like, "I don't even have those conversations with my wife." I was like, "You're
But
joking, right?" And he turned away from me and went back to his computer and
I
kept
think
typing.
the, those the folks that you meet, those folks that they just love the scriptures. They
Yeah,
just love
yeah,
the scriptures, and so
yeah.
they point you back to the scriptures over and over, and they also know that the scriptures take you where they take you.
Right.
right? And you
Right.
go with it wherever it is, that those I can those folks I can spend all day up and down ministering with and enjoying,
Absolutely.
and you find them everywhere. I mean, one of the um, I mean, I got to spend some time at there's a um, Protestant, it's an Anglican monastery. Um, so they have a PhD program, and I was trying to get into it, and I was up there because I wanted to study something that they taught, and so spent 2 weeks at this Anglican monastery and met some of the neatest Christians that were not they didn't have experience with the evangelical church. That they had come to the Lord or had been raised um, in high church Anglicanism and just really loved the Lord, loved the scriptures, knew the Bible. We're working, guys that were like, yeah, I've almost got the whole Psalter memorized, right? Like working day in, day out, trying to memorize the whole Psalter. And you hang out with them and you're like, man, these are brothers and sisters that really love the Lord. And they have never even bumped into the tradition that I was raised in or that I came to the Lord in, right? Like they don't have experience. So, but the place where you find the word and the spirit, you find fellowship and freedom. And it was a really, it messed with some of my categories.
I think we need some of that messing up right now, because I think
Oh yeah.
regardless of how we like it, God is messing up our categories where you find yourself, and this isn't saying that, Bill is inside. What's the guy's name? The atheist who's turning the corner right now is like he's been red pill. Oh,
I haven't heard about this.
he used to have a show on HBO. I think he still does.
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher. I said Bill. I couldn't remember Maher.
Yeah.
But I think
I just didn't know this was happening.
I guess red pilled is not necessarily the right term, because he's not going conservative. He's just realizing that his position is drifting, right? The party, the group
party
that he's with. Yeah. I think he sees that they're drifting, and he's trying to say, I'm not going that way. Like I signed up for something different. Right. And so he finds himself in the company of more conservative folks who still have well, actually, this is probably interesting. Bill Maher's probably right here. This is what he signed up for, liberalism right here. And then the conservatives on this end, the only thing that's happened is this. Everybody's moved. Yes. I think that Bill Maher is like, I haven't moved. I have my anchor here. Liberalism that I was a part of, that moved. Progressivism went way somewhere else. And now the conservatives really aren't conservative. They're just where I'm at.
Yeah.
Right.
That's totally funny.
I think that's what really happened. And so
I think you're right. I mean, what was really interesting out at this monastery, when we were all out to dinner one night, and you know me, I ask the question you're not supposed to ask often.
Why aren't you married?
I'm curious, right? All sorts of things.
Okay.
Well, so that was one of the things that was interesting, right? So about half of them were celibate, not married. But then you had a bunch of these monks that were married, and their wives were there with them, living at the monastery. So
that's weird.
It was very weird, right? I was like, I don't have categories for any of this stuff going on. But
that's good talk.
But at one point, so we're sitting at dinner, and it's me and about so I was the only one without apostolic succession. That was like how they like to describe me, because my ordination wasn't through a bishop that had apostolic ordination. So, but they were very I like these guys. Oh yeah, they were great. They let me partake in the liturgies with certain parts, and they were very hospitable and welcoming, and I had to wear a cassock the whole time I was there, and I kept walking around and saying, like, there will be no survivors, like Andre the Giant. But so we were out to dinner one night, and I just said, so what do y'all think about ordaining women? and the whole place went silent. You know, where it's like clinking forks and then everything stops. It's the
Yeah.
only time in my life I've experienced that. And one of the guys says, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Well, because I'm curious, and because in the Presbyterian Church, we're having to fight this off, and I don't know what it is like for you guys." And one of the guys was like, "You're really just curious?" I said, "Something is going on here that I don't know. I can tell from the reaction, but I don't know what it is. Can somebody explain?" And so one of the guys said, "That's the question they used to get most of us out of pulpits." So this whole big group of men they all used to be pulpit preachers who got removed because they wouldn't ordain women.
Oh,
And so this is like the old school. So this is the only um,
this is the resistance.
Episcopalian. This is the resistance. The only Episcopalian seminary that still was refusing entrance to women. Like they were in the fight right now. They were refusing entrance to women through the MDiv program, and they were like the last ones left. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you got to tell me that story." And he said, "Well, they came in saying, well, hey, it's just, we're just trying to have the conversation, and we're wondering who's who. And so what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?"
They don't know if they want to stone you right now, hang
Right.
you, or
It's
like
exactly.
take you out
And
and
so
beat you.
everyone that was honest, that was like, I don't think the scripture, they found other ways to get them out rather than coming at them straightforwardly.
Oh,
But
Jason. Okay.
they all got removed from their pulpits, and a number of them got completely removed from the Episcopalian Church because they were trying to stop back. So back in the 50s, like these are older men. So back in the 50s and the 60s, they're resisting the push for feminism in the Episcopalian Church, and they got picked off because they and removed. So it was a really interesting thing
do you
to
know
hear
the
the story
ways?
of.
Do you know the ways and the things that they use and some of the angles they came at them? Because this is, I don't think so. There's a book by Gary North called Crossed Fingers.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to read it. Everybody needs to. It's like 900 pages, or no. Yeah, it's like 980 pages or something like that. 86 pages. But
Yeah, it's really long,
but
but
you have to read it.
it's a fascinating read because it's about how the left took over the PCUSA.
And all denominations, really, all the conservative
All
denominations,
conservative
ultimately,
denominations.
but particularly, and he just says this is their marching orders, this is how they operate, and he used as one of the main test case PCUSA or PCA, I guess at the time. PCA.
It was
right?
PCUS at the time.
PCUS, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were a part of that, so
yeah, that's where I got saved.
Do you remember some of the stories of how they were able to get underneath that? Because they couldn't go at it directly, right? So they had to come with subversive attack.
A lot of it had to do with, so they did a couple of things. Some were whisper campaigns. Hey, did you hear so-and-so? Right. And then you get rumors going. And then some of it was they never allowed anything to come to a vote until they could win. So they never the left never let a losing vote come to the floor. So they used the Robert's Rules of Order to make sure that, because they always knew what the vote tallies would be. The folks on the right were just being honest and straightforward, and they weren't counting votes to make sure that they weren't politicking. The folks on the left were gathering up, making sure that they had votes, but they didn't want to reveal anything until they knew they had the votes. And so if they knew they couldn't win, or if they weren't sure they could win, they would use Robert's Rules of Order to keep things from coming to the floor for a vote. So
that's so pharisaical.
Really it's very underhanded. Yeah. And so by the time it came to the floor for a vote, they knew that they could win. And so then they wouldn't even get the debate going, right? They would let's just get it to a vote. No need for debate. Steamroll it, get it through. And then, because they knew they had the votes, because they'd been politicking behind the scenes. And so, a pastor of mine, he was telling me all about this, because he was, and he said the problem is conservatives tend to have, uh, if you're he basically what he said is if you're preaching the gospel, you have a church that's alive and rolling and doing things and growing, and you've got ministry needs. He said on the left, they're living off of the earlier ministries, so the money
For
is
someone on the right.
of someone on the right.
Yeah.
The money's in a bank somewhere, and
Yeah.
it's not they've got somebody else's building, they've got somebody else's money, they're living off of it. Their churches are shrinking, and so they don't have ministry needs, and so they can focus their energy on taking over presbytery.
Okay, time out. Don't forget where you're at.
Okay.
I just gotta paint this picture. A person finds a woman, gets married, has kids. Let's say you have 6 of them. Phew, everywhere.
Yeah.
Poopy diapers, messed up bathrooms, toilets, yards a mess, upstairs bedrooms a mess, cars a mess. Okay, come home, got to cook dinner, put these kids to bed, sing them a song, teach them how to be good humans, love it, stop hitting spank, got to do all this stuff in your life, and you're working a full-time job at the same time, all these things going on, trying to keep up with your other family and friends, and person with no kids.
Yeah,
I'm going to get into politics.
They're going to get in politics. That's exactly it. But they're like, oh, we're going to go down to the protest. We have time. Right. Who's got time to protest anything?
We're going to go rally.
I got children.
Yeah, only thing I'm protesting is don't rub the poop on the wall. I'm protesting that. Get the bleach. No, you can't eat the cat. Maybe, but not yet.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. Let's wait till the apocalypse.
So okay,
because at that point it's him or us.
So you have these thriving church. I'm going some. This is funny. I have a set of questions here already set up. They're going to line up exactly with what you're going through. So I want to finish this out. We didn't even talk about this. I'm so excited. So you got these ministries that are thriving. They're being successful. God's blessing it. Pastors are working in, so they got ministry needs. You have these liberal groups who are living off of someone else's past capital of being faithful. Yep. Something has happened, and they actually have the equity of that faithfulness that they're living through. And now they're using their time instead of doing ministry, politicking inside of the denomination.
Right. So for them, the denomination was really important because it was the power structure. And the left is Machiavellian in its metaphysic, even in the church. And so the power structure is important to control because it defines reality, right?
Explain that. Power structure is important to control because it defines reality. So the church,
so within the church, you had the modernist, so my experiences with the PCUSA. So that's where I was and heard the stories of older ministers, and then had a younger minister that was discipling me that was going through it. Who was in the fight in the 90s. So you had the modernism, the theological modernism was coming over from Germany and from Europe generally.
Had been coming over
since the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And so 1920s, people start sniffing it out and saying, oh, wait a second, we got some problems. And the fight
J. Gresham Machen. Yeah.
J. Gresham Machen becomes one of the central figures of the fight. And for him, it's in the fight happens at the International Missions Commission or Committee, right?
Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Are you serious?
Yes. So the International Missions Committee, some of the groups had gotten into sort of communism. They were more like pushing communism than they were pushing Christianity. Social gospel. They called it the social gospel, where we're here to help reorganize society in a more just way.
Okay.
Right. Go ahead.
Why is that place where you're directly dealing with people and helping them? Why was that a target for the communists?
Well, I think it's because you can get behind enemy lines, so to speak, because you're a missions organization. I mean, it's similar to the unions where you think,
Uh-huh.
okay, I don't have to run the company. I don't have to do the work of starting the company, but I can control the company from this lever. The
Don't we want to
union.
help people?
Well,
Guys.
there are
Right?
people that want to help people, and they're easily taken in by this sort of argument. And what Machen said is, I want a church should be able to support its own missions that are gospel preaching missions, because that's what missions should be about.
Yeah.
And
Don't tell the
they were
Southern
like,
Baptists that.
yeah, don't you want to help people, right? And I think what's hard is, it's like the mission of the church um, has gotten so confused and convoluted over the last 100 years, 150 years, 100 years really, um, that now we can't, we are very confused, and I think we need to spend the time before the face of the Lord trying to recover what our sense of mission should be. And because the old monastic missions, or missions, they would come in, they would establish a monastery, establish great farming practices, share and
Education.
teach the farming practices, the education, the bring a library with them, and they were very generous, and they also preached the gospel well in and baptized lots of people, and right, and we have ended up setting at variance things that are not enemies, in our missions, because there are people that don't have the God, because we have people that don't know or preach or care about the gospel, or they're afraid. I mean, I got to go in to into northern Iraq, but because my plane was late, I missed um, the orientation meeting where they told us to be careful about talking about Jesus in public. And so the first time I got a microphone, I immediately started talking about Jesus, and the guy who's like, my job. I mean, my job was, I was teaching classroom management, right? That's why I was there. And I just said, hey, as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the believer in Christianity, the principles that I'm going to use to teach you classroom management all come from the Bible. And so I just want you guys to know and understand that that this is all based on the first few chapters of the book of Genesis. And so let me tell you about classroom management now, right?
You can't get that back in the tube. That's like,
No, yeah, no way.
what, that guy
Was,
playing that one. I mean, he plans everything. He's like, what?
Yeah.
I'm this is gonna be funny. Jason's gonna miss this flight, so he can open up just like this. And
So
what's funny though?
First one speaking before everybody else. Too.
You know what though?
Amazing.
Yeah, and also that's exactly what needed to happen.
Oh yeah.
And
I probably would have done it anyway.
that was gonna be my second thing. Is like, I think you would have said, "Oh, that's where I can't poke at." Well, guess what? This is exactly where I'm gonna go. I think you probably I think if they would have told you not to, you probably would have poked a little harder, which probably wouldn't have been as good.
You're probably right.
And so you're like, yeah.
I mean, because the because what's the worst that happens? I get to be a martyr on Muslim soil. What? Praise the Lord. But
start a revival.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what was cool was that meant that the rest of the week I was talking with a lot of Muslim teachers that were very curious, because they're teachers, right? So they're curious. And then also, once the principles worked, right? I had one guy come up to me. So we teach the principles in the morning, and then the students would come in the afternoon. And so I was able to show them the principles in action. And then by the end of the week, they had taken over. They were using the principles of classroom management. And it was, and I had said, you can control, it doesn't matter how big the group of kids is, you can control them with non-coercive means if they trust you. Right. And I had one teacher come up to me, and I had seen him at the beginning of the week grab a student by the ear and drag him through, scream in his face, and then sit him down. I'd seen it. He came up at the end of the week and said, "You know, I didn't believe you when you said it was possible. Then I watched you do it, and now I've done it myself. You can control these students with love and not with and not with pain."
But that's a different. We can't. I just got to stop here. You got to remember, you just reframed for him a worldview that he did not have before then.
Right.
Like they only understand power in that
Islam
worldview.
means submission.
Right.
Yeah. There's no.
Right.
It is, and that's exactly it. And so, and that is the Machiavellianism that I'm talking about. Right? Is that that power is the fundamental thing, and then reality sits on top of it floats on top of a sea of power, right? And whoever has the power controls reality, right? And so that is a left view. That's a leftist view. It's everything but a Trinitarian, but Trinitarian Christianity has held that view. And so when you start having non-Trinitarian Christianity, which is what modernism.
Oh, this is heresy.
Was. Yeah, it was heresy, right? So it was a rejection of a Trinitarian.
Wait a second.
Metaphysic that modernism was.
You know, it's funny. We will sit up here and go toe to toe with people over what they say they ascend to as far as the doctrine of the Trinity, but we will not go toe to toe on the practical applications of the doctrine of the Trinity.
Yeah.
So then when we see people operating like this, we don't say you're a heretic. We don't do that. Yeah. Right?
But usually it's because we hold those same assumptions.
You shut up. You shut up. Shut up. Shut up. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Nah. You're right. That's kind of, Jason, we talked about that power dynamic so much here. And the more we talk about it, I feel like I understand it new every time we talk about it, because I'm so attached to, like you just said, the world, like that guy. With my parenting, because of my size and my position and authority, it is easy to just move your kids around because you have power. Right. It's really easy to just be like, no, go over there, sit down, go to this, and then use your spanking ability to be able, or your pure force to be able to move them where you want them to do. And when my young oldest was 2 years old, I realized that wasn't going to work well. Right. Like if I have to do, eventually this child is going to be big enough where this isn't going to work well. And if that's all I got, then I'm not going to win here. Right. Now, I want to drive foolishness out of their heart, but that's not what people, I realize with a lot of parenting, people aren't just trying to drive foolishness out of their heart. They're trying to control their kids, but they're not giving their kids something to love. And I remember that I fell in love with the God of my parents because watching them, I was like, man, that's the good life. Right.
Yeah.
And I could see that. And I was attracted to that. And so with my mom, particularly, her discipleship of me was easy because I fell in love with the God that she loved. Right. And so and so I knew I had to change at a very, very young age with my children, the way that I thought about my parenting, because the way that I thought about my parenting with my kids were bigger, I wasn't going to be able to not without a serious fight from them, be able to move them on my sheer power alone. That wasn't going to work. Right. We had to come to a place where they all thought this was good also.
And I think that's exactly it. Is reality is not a works-based system. Right. Fundamental reality is grace through faith system. Right. And I think that's what, and so we don't, our kids are not, we don't raise our kids by works. Coercion doesn't work in the long run. But what happens a lot of times is then people say, well, I guess then there's just nothing I can do, right? Whereas, so that when we still think it works, then we just double down on spankings and we do it more and harder, and think that's what we've got to do. Versus, um, when spanking is a tool in our faith, in a faithful hand, then it's a wisdom giving tool, because you're setting up your home as a small version of a microcosm of the world, a microcosm of reality, right?
God's kingdom.
Here's
Yeah.
here's how the world really works.
Yep.
If you do this sort of thing, you find pain at the end of that road. So
Don't go
when you
that
do
way.
this sort of thing here, you get a spanking, because the spanking is quick pain that is relatively painless, and it doesn't last. Right? That's the point, right? Because there's pain that's not relatively painless that lasts a long time down that direction.
Yeah.
And so we
Yeah.
want to set up a gate at the beginning of this road that's a light shock, because electrocution is that way. So it's a tool that helps our kids come to understand reality, so that when they get to the world, when they get out into the wider world, they say, "Oh, I recognize this place." Right? I understand how it works. That sometimes something looks one way, but really it's something else. Right? That the devil puts bait on the hook. I've learned that. I've learned to recognize the bait. They also hopefully are learning what to do with their sin, because it's not like we raise them and then they quit making mistakes and they quit sinning, right? They've learned that this is also a world where there's that mercy that's new every morning, that forgiveness is
Right.
quick, that you go to the Lord and say, "Please forgive me," and he says, "I do," and it's done, right? He no longer treats you according to the sin.
Yeah.
That shame, that shame is something that you can leave at the foot of the cross and walk away from it. It doesn't have to control you, and guilt doesn't have to control you. Like all those things, you want them to be learning all of those things with the way they interact with the microcosm of reality that you have built in your home.
And just to piggyback on that, and I want to get back to the monastery, but we're still talking about that. But
Yeah.
I also want to add, while they are learning something, I think it's essential. We are engaged in political ideas and political worldview and thinking about how to have the best biblical worldview as it relates to politics. That's our goal. But when you have a family, it's not just for the education of your kids. I think as an adult who has children, you need to take every moment of your kids' interaction and conflicts as a way for you to gain wisdom of a situation. And to be able to use the scriptures and say, all right, Lord, as a judge, as a leader, as a ruler, as a Lord of my home, how do I exercise wisdom between my daughter and my son arguing over a toy?
Right.
I mean, and how do I come to a conclusion that is just? Was my rendering of the situation a just rendering of the situation? Did I exercise justice in this? Or did I say, listen, if you guys keep fighting about this, both of y'all going to bed? It's like, really?
Did I ever tell you about the time that we had two of our kids arguing, and they were just arguing over something, and what had happened was they had set up an if-then situation. The if happened, and then the person that said, if this happens, then I will do this, refused to do this. Right. So
right.
Trying to protect identities here.
Yes.
And so my wife said, and they were just bickering. Right. And so she was like, that's it. Courtroom. So she starts moving chairs. She set up a courtroom. She took two of the siblings and made them the jury. And then she took the two siblings that were bickering, and she said, you each have 5 minutes to prepare an argument, and then your siblings are going to decide. And so they both had opening statements, and then they had cross examinations.
That's
So she
great.
set up a courtroom. She was like, "This is it. This has got to be done." And it became this wisdom opportunity where, and so one person started their opening statements, and then the other person, um, she, or the other child started the opening statements, and she pulls Aristotle out of her back pocket and begins to read Aristotle's definition of truth, or Aristotle's definition of truth. Yeah. Um, and and then puts it away. And so she begins arguing from a definition of truth as to what this other sibling had said, as being not upholding the truth. And then they begin cross-examining. And by the end, they're all giggling, right? Everybody is laughing so
Interesting.
hard that the tension is broken. And now it's a game, right? They're having a good time, but they're practicing they're practicing their argument. They're practicing, our kids, we've never really said talking back is not allowed as long as the talking back is reasonable. Right. We have long conversations about, so now we have had obey first and then come back and we'll have the conversation. We've had that.
Right.
But it's never, the talking back is never not allowed. And because
that's different in my home. I just want you to know right now. I'll tell you about that in a second.
But there's a way. But what my wife has done is trained them to talk back.
Right. I understand what you mean by that.
Yeah. That's not how you do it. That's not going to get you what you want. Don't talk like that. Right. And so that until they become reasonable. Right.
Mm-hmm. You're talking like a Job type of talk back. Let me talk to God.
Yeah.
Let me talk to God. I feel like I've been done wrong here.
Let me explain. And my wife will say, go put your shoes where I told you to. Right. And when they're there, come back. We'll have the conversation. And she's trained them to talk she's trained them how to talk back in a way that gets their point across. They don't always win, or they rarely win because my wife is sharp as a tack. But every once in a while, she'll be like, okay, no, I get what you're saying. You make a good point.
Right.
And
right.
So
no, that's pretty close to how it runs here.
Yeah.
That's pretty close.
So but there's the jury, I'll just finish the story real quick. By the time the jury came down, even the person who got voted against themselves with the jury, right? But it had become because
right.
All right, I get it, right? And they but it was she turned this contentious moment into a game that became a courtroom and my kids will still joke about the courtroom, the courtroom incident, that because there's teachable moments, and that we often make I'm losing control, go to your room moments, because we think it's about control and not about raising wise kids.
That's right? What I mean about the power. Yeah, there's a power dynamic, right? So I got to maintain. This is why I do not like police officers. I got to maintain power over the situation, so keep it in control, right? And but there's also another way to do this, right? Where you have a citizenry that wants to obey you because you are reasonable with them, right? And they can see that. I like the courtroom thing in a lot of ways, because it gives you some opportunities to deal with the gospel too. There was I've heard Easy from Living Waters talk about doing the courtroom with his kids when they were younger, and the kids be found guilty, and he'd be the prosecutor. He'd be found guilty, and they would be found guilty, and then he would get up and take their punishment that they deserved for them in a way to communicate the gospel to them, so that they would have a courtroom. Did you take the stuff mommy told you not to take? Did you not obey mommy? Okay, well now, instead of getting the dessert that you really like, you get green beans, unflavored or whatever, So, and then dad says, I'm going to eat the nasty food that you deserve to eat, and you get to have daddy's favorite dessert. Right. And the kids would sit there and say, "That's not right, though. Wait, that's not right. I'm actually the one that's guilty. I should be." Yeah, I know. And Daddy loves you. He's going to take your punishment if you ask for forgiveness. I'll. Well, yeah. Will you forgive? Absolutely. And Daddy will sit there and eat the. And I remember hearing that, and he's like, "That's a great way to communicate the gospel and
Yeah.
repentance and model those things." It's also a great way to reveal offices and roles and authority
Yeah.
that are not power dynamics, right? We don't know how to live in this world that's not a power dynamic. And so I just, the more and more I think about, we were talking about wisdom earlier, my kids, we had a situation where one wanted to watch one show, one wanted to watch another show, and they couldn't figure out which show to watch. And they brought it up to me, and they were like, it was my turn to choose. No, it was my turn to choose. And I was like, well, if you guys don't figure this out, right, then Daddy's going to take away the TV from everybody. I wasn't going to do it. I wanted to see something, right? This is like the two babies. This is like a baby.
Yeah.
The two women. And one of them said, "Oh, good, because I don't want to watch. I'd rather not watch anything." I was like, there goes my problem.
We found
it.
Yeah.
We found it. I was like, all right. So the other child, you get to choose what it is you guys want to watch, right? And so the one who was like, you're like, you know what? Let's go talk about your heart real quick.
Right, yeah. I would rather everybody had to suffer.
Yes, exactly. Yes, then you get this. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it helped me. It's helped me understand that my problem with my kids isn't so much a problem with my kids as it is opportunities for me to learn what wisdom is, right? And to exercise that. And in the process, as I'm learning wisdom, I'm discipling them so they learn wisdom and they learn to love each other and learn the law of God and to love the law of God and apply it to their own lives and operate in that way. But if you're not doing that in your home, then whatever your home actually is probably more like that of our current denominations, our governments, our policing. All of it is probably like, it's just power. Y'all sit down there and shut up and leave me alone. I don't want to deal with this, right? I'm gonna turn it off. Now everybody's happy.
Well, and you see this all over. Kids are treated as accessories to their parents' lives a lot, right? They don't have their own story before the Lord. They don't have, they that their job is to be the extension of their parents. And you see, I mean, it's sad to watch. It's sadder to be raised by that.
So that's in that the power dynamic is embedded into the way we live, the way we even raise our kids. So you got these monks, and they get brought to this position ultimately because they got kicked out of.
Just ousted from pulpits all over the country where they were preaching the gospel, but they had just expressed that they planned to stand against the ordination of women, and so they were just each dislodged, sometimes just by the bishop when they would move everybody around and they just wouldn't get a pulpit. They just wouldn't get replaced anywhere, and so then they'd have to switch to try and find a bishop that would put them somewhere.
Until they got rid of the bishops that did.
So they got rid of all the bishops, and so all the bishops eventually they were, and the bishops would often keep their positions about this sort of thing quiet until they got power. Right. And so that's the other thing that would happen is which is why the Gary North's book was called Crossed Fingers, because he goes through all of the ways they want to say, yes, we believe in the Apostles' Creed, all the way down to changing it from I believe, and I think this was something that happened in the German church, not the American church, but instead of I believe it for the beginning of the Apostles' Creed, they changed it to we believe, because then people that didn't personally believe it could still confess it because the congregation officially believed it.
General instead of specific,
right? And
Ah.
And I remember, I was at a church where we used the "We Believe" version, and I thought, well, that's it's it's nice. It's kind of communal,
Who would
and
ever think that would be the battle though? We
I
over
know
I. We over I.
the
That's
a
it.
pronoun battle. It was a pronoun battle,
Oh. Oh.
where they shifted around
Oh,
pronouns
Jason, shut up.
because they said we can
Oh.
control as a means of not of being able to lie without consequences.
Bro, we had the first pronoun battle in the church.
In the church, yeah. So and that was one of the ones that the pastor explained to me. Um
Wow.
and he was like, because who's going to argue
We and
about
I.
pronouns, right?
Oh my goodness.
Because we do believe it, right?
But we didn't see it coming.
But didn't see it coming.
We didn't see it coming.
I like to where I was
Oh my
saying this
goodness.
week, that critical theory is just that's what that's the devil's argument in Genesis 2, right? Is that that the rivalry is so fundamental, right? That the rivalry is a part of the fundamental part of reality, and so it's it's either him or us. It's either him or you, right? That's the devil's argument with Eve is the either God wins or you win. Who's it going to be? It's a rivalry. That's just fundamental to nature. That's
Zero-sum game, right?
Zero-sum game. And once you buy into that, then you see it everywhere, right? And
everywhere.
But what if rivalry is not fundamental? What if that's I mean, then you can just say, I will play. I don't play that game. Nope. That's a game. You're trying to add something. You're trying to put a poison cherry on top of this cake, and I don't play that.
Yeah, but okay. But it seems that that's the game. And it seems, according to the way the Anglican Church has worked and all the other conservative churches before they went liberal, that was the thing that made them lose because they didn't play the game. And so the people came in there and gutted them with this game. And it was a power struggle.
I actually think that there was I think that there was compromise that had already happened that put them in that position in the first place. And some of it I think is just it's like the I thing where you just can't and this is the people that tell the truth have a hard time imagining that somebody would lie to them. Right. This is why you see in a lot of churches, you see pyramid schemes sometimes take off in a church.
Right.
And it's because truth-telling people can't imagine that somebody would lie to them. And that's just a wisdom thing. You start to even truth-telling people learn that eventually.
Do you think? Do you think that's part of just kind of humanity itself? Everyone is surprised when somebody lied. Like, you lied? I think that's just kind of built into the human makeup is to believe that what people tell them.
Yeah, I think we want to.
Because if you look at a product, no one looks at a product and says. Thinks the other way around. Their first thought is, "Oh wow, interesting," and then they have to think through this fact that that's not going to work. It can't work. It's impossible. So their first inclination is to believe.
They're promising more than they can deliver. Yeah,
right. So
I do think that's our. I do think that's. We're not wired to be cynical. That might be an American thing.
Oh, interesting.
Right? I mean,
interesting.
But
because of a Christian society.
Yeah, because of Christian society that we have.
I might be taking that too far. You might be right about that. We
fundamentally value honesty in America to the point that if somebody comes in, they're like, "Look, I'm about to lie to you." We'll say, "Okay, tell me what you're going to say," and I'm glad to know that it's a lie. Okay, and then we buy from them anyway. right? Because they were honest about their lies. Like it's a very America is in we have a tradition of valuing honesty that you don't have
Yeah.
everywhere.
You know what? You're
So
right. I forget how much the gospel has, in one sense, I think that we are in a permeated culture of power because we are forgetting what we really have been baptized in, what is Christianity. And so we're
yeah,
letting things creep in. And so there's some of that there that's we take for granted that the other side is using against us because
yeah,
we are people who will say that person's made in the image of God. You know, my first response to him is to believe him, which is why our court systems are like, hey, you need witnesses to convict, you need a jury. We still have a lot of that Christian innocent until proven guilty is our American value
yeah,
and way that's slipping because we're forgetting why we think that way. It's because of the gospel. It's because of Christianity, right?
yeah.
Um,
Well, and we've actually turned innocent until proven guilty into a social norm. Because it's not
it's
that's not a
illegal.
social statement. That's a legal statement.
Yep.
Um, so, but we've actually turned it into a social norm
Is that
where it
bad?
could,
I don't know if that's bad.
I don't know if it's bad either, but I don't think it was intended to be that way. So I mean,
Wait, hold on.
we,
I got to challenge that. Can I challenge that real quick?
mhm.
Aren't laws intended to trickle down, or should I say the culture represents the laws that so the culture itself has laws that reflect its culture, right? So if you have
Yes,
innocent until proven guilty, it's because the people themselves have a culture that they look at each other like that until there's a evidence that it's otherwise, that they are guilty or have lied or stolen. So then the laws should be reflecting what the culture has built inside of it.
that is true. But we also live in a culture where people can put onto social media um, something that is an obvious problem, and people will say, "Well, look, they're innocent until proven guilty. This is, this is," and you're like, "Well, but it's on their social media. Like I'm looking at it,"
Yeah.
and they'll say, "Well, no, that's not how that works. We got to wait for the court to decide." And you think, "But we don't, right? Because
But that's I think that's the difference between innocent until proven guilty and innocent until you have a reason to challenge, right? Like they've given me
yeah,
enough reasons to challenge whether or not they're
yeah,
going a particular way because I have evidence that might point to guilt.
right,
Right? So it's
right."
not like without evidence to you need this enough evidence to challenge the position. Not to say that they are in final retort guilty.
But well, but I think there is a um I, I,
You're not
how would
gonna
I
hurt
put
my
it?
feelings with this.
No, no,
So
I
just
know, I know.
okay.
I'm just thinking through it. I think that what you have though that's going on is um innocent till proven guilty is a jurisdictional issue,
Yeah,
and we always want to kick everything up to the highest jurisdiction rather
I
than
got you.
make judgments. So innocent until proven guilty should be something that guides me within my jurisdiction. I have to make judgment calls all the time, though, within my jurisdiction. That that that. So, for example, if I'm going to work with somebody I don't know them, but somebody I know knows them, I'll often call and say, "Hey, man, give me your take on this guy."
Yep.
I just did this not too long ago, right?
How
Let's
many people do you
consider
call?
him.
2 or 3?
Um, I call it depends on the relationship I have with
Yeah.
the person and how well I trust them and how well they know the person.
So
So
then
sometimes, because
you
I don't
have
want to
2 or
call,
3.
yeah, sometimes you have to have two or three, um,
No, I mean I'm saying
but
you're
I don't want to
subbing as
call
a
a bunch
as a
of,
witness.
yeah, yeah. So I don't want to call a bunch of people if I can get it done with one
Yeah.
or two,
Because you're yeah.
because I'm not trying to, because for me, it's not because I want to protect reputations because I would want somebody to protect mine. But if I'm working with somebody and I'm like, I don't know, I don't know them well enough, or um,
But you're
they're
still
promising a
practicing the
lot. You
rule.
know, you're I
You're still practicing
I
the rule.
right. I'm trying to practice it within my jurisdiction. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
No. I
I
agree.
I think what we have. I don't think that's what happens
I
within
get what you're saying.
society.
I get what you're
I
saying.
think so.
What
I
you're
don't
saying is
think
people want
people.
to
I think
go
people
ahead.
ought to. I think people ought to use that principle within their jurisdiction.
I got you.
Um,
But that's not how
but
we're currently using it.
I don't think we currently use it that way. I think we use it to stop other people from making
Okay, so
judgments
let
when
me
they
say it
should
like
be making judgments often.
so.
Right?
Let me say it like this then. If your presupposition is a power struggle, then innocent until proven guilty becomes a way of you creating, let's take it Machiavellian, everything to the highest form of authority,
Yes.
and then let's lynch you there.
And I think that's what we have going on right now, right?
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
think a lot of this, a lot of the January 6th stuff that's going on right now, I think that's what's going on. Is you've got all sorts of people that are like, well, but he already confessed that he's guilty, right? And look, he was wearing that weird hat, and so why would he confess to guilt if if he's not really guilty? Now that so none of so even though the evidence is now in front of their eyes, they're still saying, but he confessed to guilt. Now, they're not looking at what he confessed to. They're not looking at what the charges originally were versus what they actually became when he said he would, I can't remember his name, Jacob something, the QAnon shaman. It's been really interesting to watch. This is the first thing that's actually pulled me onto social media consistently in a long time, because I want to read through what people are saying from both sides. Because I still don't have a single story that can make sense of all of the things I've seen. Right now,
No.
you've
I
got
agree.
all this, and I'm like, I do not yet have a sensible narrative that puts all of these things together, which means I know I'm missing facts. Because if you have enough, when you have all the facts, then you can tell the story in a way that makes sense. And right now, I cannot tell the story in a way that makes sense of all the things. So either some of the facts are not true that I think I have been able to confirm as facts, right? So that's possible, or there are facts that are currently missing for me, and so I can't make sense of how some of these things fit together. But watching people try to make sense of it has been fascinating, because there are people that just say, I refuse to add these new facts to the story because I've got a story that makes sense right now.
Right. Yep.
Right. Um, I thought I had a story that I thought I had a story that made vague sense. And now I'm like, nope, I didn't. There's the biggest one for me. So just about Jacob, I think is his name. Just that part of the story, watching the police help him try to find an unlocked door to get in to the Senate chamber. There is no version of the story yet in which that fact makes any sort of sense. I can come up with a story that makes sense of that fact, but I don't have other facts to support it.
Right. Well, you would need to talk to those other officers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who told you
Why did you open the
to
door
get?
for him? Why were
Who
you trying to
told
help
you
him? Yeah.
to allow? Who told you to put him there? Right.
Yeah.
So the options are, at this point, there's somebody above them that said, "Hey, get this guy where we can get some good pictures of him as the leader," or they were saying, "Yeah, we better help stop this steal because we know that." So, right. Those are the
So,
two options I've got right now.
so why does innocent until proven guilty? Why does that? How does that fit into that
Because
narrative?
because
The way that we use it. Yeah.
the way so the because you've got people that are saying, well, he confessed to guilt. Why would he confess to guilt if he knew about this stuff? Right?
Yeah, I've seen that so
Right.
much.
And
But yeah,
so he has proven himself guilty. He can't, there is no way for it to become innocent. But that's not how these court systems work right now. That's not what a guilty plea even means anymore, because there's been such a breakdown of
yeah,
the use of
yeah.
innocent until proven guilty, where you I remember reading the statistic on the number of things that actually go all the way to court and how low it is because of plea bargains are, has how most things are solved now. Right? That is not a good
That's not a
system.
justice system. That's not a
Not a
justice system.
justice system anymore, right?
Nope.
So, but then the other thing is,
I call those
um,
backroom deals.
yeah, exactly. When you know what your jurisdiction is, right? So my jurisdiction has to do with, I have to explain January 6th to my kids, right? That I need to learn wisdom from what's going on to understand the direction of the country, because I've got a jurisdiction that's supposed to help my kids make sense of their world. I can't do that currently. So partly because of innocent until proven guilty, right? I'm looking at the evidence and saying, well, if he's guilty, the authorities who are in
What are
charge
they? Yeah.
of that are the ones guiding him around. There, he ceases to be guilty if the people who are in charge of the Capitol on that day of protecting it are saying, hey, come this way. You're supposed to listen to them when you're in the Capitol. Right? Now, to say, well, on the books it says he can't be in there, doesn't make any sense when the authority that's standing in front of him, who's in charge of upholding you can't be in here, is saying, come this way.
Yeah.
Which authority is he supposed to listen to? Right? The police officer standing in front of him, who's in charge of, who's taken a vow to uphold this, or a law that's written somewhere over there that he may or may not even know about. Right? It's not his responsibility to know all of that. It's their responsibility, and they're guiding him through that. That right there makes me say innocent. How did his lawyer? Why was his lawyer plea dealing anything when you've got this evidence that he's innocent? Was it not available? Where, what's going on?
There was no evidence. There was no.
None of it was ever entered as evidence. So either his lawyer didn't see it, his lawyer was in on it, his lawyer is a bad lawyer, is a possibility, right? That he's just,
Or he just said, you know what? Rather than fight all this, I'll just plead guilty so that I can take a smaller. They see what they do is they offer you. They say this is a horrible system and a horrible setup.
Yeah.
They say, listen, you take this to court. We got the evidence of this, that, and the other thing. Every jury, because of the public outcry, is going to convict you. You'll face 25 years to life, right? Whatever, right?
Right.
These are punishable federal crimes. You'll never work again. Or you get 5 years, you plead guilty to these things, the things they really want you to plead guilty to so they can get a win, because it's not about you being guilty or innocent. It's about them getting a win, however they can get the win. If they can get the win, left, right, up, and down, that's what they want. They want a conviction. It looks good. All right. And so you'll say, hey, that's an easier road for me. It's not true, but I'd rather plead no contest or guilt than try and lose in a real court appeal. Right. And they stack it really heavily against you because they know that you're probably not going to, want to fight that so that you bend.
Well, and then because it's a narrative game, once you say guilty, then you can fill that guilty with whatever you want,
whatever narrative you want to fill with. Yeah. It's
and
a
that's
very
what
unjust system.
So, and that's the other thing that's going on right now is when you look at what he actually pled guilty to versus what everyone said, look, he pled guilty, so let me tell you all the things he did wrong.
Right.
I mean, that's a demonic tactic, right? Well,
that's the only way our courtrooms really operate right now. Like
No, I know.
that's the only way
That's
there's no justice there. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's a horrible system. We have
horrible system.
remnants of justice that still are around, and I'm praising God for that.
Right.
I think there's hope there, but most of the time, the way things are running, it's not a good setup right now. It's not a healthy one. We're losing.
Yeah.
It's eroding away in a lot of ways. So I want to go ahead. Do you want to say something? Because I want to get back to
Well,
the.
and I think that's why it's so important that we raise kids that understand justice.
That's right.
I mean, there's
That's right.
the restoration of it is not going to be a Machiavellian top down. We'll go get the power and then we'll restore it to its up. Not right now. At some point in the future, I believe the restoration will happen that way.
There isn't a place that operates in America where someone cannot have a true virtuous, just understanding of the world. I mean, if you're a mechanic, you need to have a very rich, virtuous understanding of justice and duty, right? And and just virtue, period. Right? What's righteous? What's right? What is good? What is a blessing? Like, this is a lady coming in here, single mom with kids. Her brakes need to work super well, right?
And if she says, "Hey, I can't pay right now,"
right?
That's different. You being able to make the distinction between her and a guy who you're like, well, no, you got a job. I know you got a job. I know you can pay.
You can work here in my shop and pay it off if you need.
Right. There are people that can try, that'll try, and there will always be people that try to game the system. But being able to look at a single mom and say, in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter if she's trying to game the system. She has no protection. So
right.
We as her neighbors are her protection. And so you gotta be able to make those distinctions wisely.
That's right. And wisdom,
and have that wisdom.
But that's why I'm saying, like, even if you are raising your kids to understand and to have wisdom, it's not just to be in the courtroom.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like you were saying earlier, this is in my sphere of operation. I don't care what industry they go into. And this is where the breakdown is. Everybody looks and say, oh, our institutions have failed us. There's two major institutions I think have really failed us: the family and the church. Like, those are the two. Everything else, I'm not really so concerned about, because the people are made in the family and are taught by the family and are discipled by the church to be able to go into every other institution. Right. Yeah. So all the other institutions are a reflection of those two, period. There's no getting around that. Right. And so if you want to see better institutions, what you don't do is hunker down on the institutions out there, the other ones. You need the right kind of people that say, no, I don't care what this institution teaches. I'm not going to treat a human being like that.
Yeah. I just heard an incredible story about a young lady getting a master's degree in speech therapy. And for her final project, she was given a man who's trying to transition into a woman. She was told, go teach him how to alter his speech so that he can speak in a feminine way.
Talk like a woman. Yeah.
And she said no, because she's a Christian. And she's probably getting kicked out now of the master's degree program and losing 7 years of education towards what she wants to do is help kids that have speech impediments. Right.
And you know what?
And so she's and she's just saying, I gotta stand with Jesus on this one. This is, and that'd be really, really hard, but those are parents that are proud, right? Those are some parents that are like proud of the daughter they raised.
I think people need to see what's happening. All of the Christians that are standing their ground and refusing to go along with the world, this new cell is splitting off. And this
Yeah.
one that is removing the Christians from it are going to die. There will be no, all these Christians that say, listen, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take this experimental shot, whatever, right? And are standing on that and say, you don't get to have an authority over me in this manner. They've all been pushed out of a lot of institutions and separated from them. So now there's a moral, virtuous compass that is gone and is
Right.
developing on the other side. So now you got a bunch of kids who are not going to have this kind of virtuous type of teacher, moral foundation teacher who's going to teach them language, and their whole language thing is going to just erode and go away, and you have people who won't speak well, and that's going to die off. It's not going to go well, and then you're going to have this other group of people that's going to flourish.
Yeah, I just heard another story as well from a gentleman who didn't get the vaccine, Christian guy, who just said, I don't trust it. His job, he was to watch body cam footage for a major police department, and make judgments, right? Help put together the cases for criminals,
Lord have
and
mercy.
turn in the cops that broke the law. So you had a solid Christian dude who studied the law and loved justice, who was the eyes on a major police department, right? That's what he did. He said, most of the time you got cops that they're trying to do their best. They're trying to do what's right. And,
right.
He said, and you've got criminals that are criminals, and then you've got people that just are in the wrong spot at the wrong time, and things didn't go.
That's right.
And he could make those distinctions because he loved the Lord. He's a compassionate guy. Turned in cops when he had to, when they broke the law, because he understood the importance of having just police department.
Yep.
That guy got replaced like that because and they had to go find somebody new who may or may not have that Christian understanding that the law is
they're gonna,
over everyone equally, that has
sure
the compassion of the criminals, that wants just cops, that doesn't have a Machiavellian view that, well, the cops are in charge, so whatever they say, right? That guy, you hope you can replace that guy with somebody that has that same level of both compassion as a Christian for criminals and wants to make sure that they're not railroaded, right? And so if the evidence isn't there because they're innocent until proven guilty, and it's his job to watch the evidence and decide, is this legal evidence or not? And that also at the same time is would rather get fired than not turn in a corrupt cop, right? You want that guy to be the eyes, right? He's gone though, because he didn't like, and for him, what was interesting is he just thought it wasn't legal that they were forcing it on people, and so he refused on legal grounds. No, this is not legal. I'm not going to comply, not because I don't want the shot, but because it's illegal for you to tell me to comply, and somebody's got to say no. And he studied the law, and he, so
that's how it makes him now. Yep.
And you're like, oh, that police department is not better off without him.
So earlier we were talking about I think about 35 minutes ago now, 40 minutes ago, maybe. I hate to do this where we're getting close to the end, but I have to go here. We were talking about the idea that these monks, was it monks, right? In this monastery.
Yeah.
They refused to put women in the pulpits, and they didn't come at them directly. They came at them indirectly to remove, to come and subversively remove them from their positions, and basically got them kicked out with Anglicanism. Episcopalian. Okay, Episcopal
Church.
So these guys all ended up in a monastery together, and you're up there staring the pot. But so I came this morning, I turned on I started looking at, I think it was Twitter. And remember that Canadian teacher that was wearing the prosthetic breast in classroom, huge and stuff like that. And anyway, it was a
No,
big story. Well, you don't even need to know all that, but basically, I think it was him. It was on Fox News. It basically said we need to completely destroy capitalism. And I wrote down. I want to make sure I remember exactly what I wrote. And it was interesting because I'm saying, wait a second, the fight that we're having with, and the pronoun thing you talked about earlier, man, that still hits me. But the fight that we're having now, I thought was over sexual issues. I thought was over LGBTQ stuff. I thought was over roles, man and woman, right? I thought was over, and this person who is I don't know what he is, a pervert, says we got to destroy capitalism. And I want to talk to you about fascism a little bit today, but I'm like, wait a second, um why is it that the left thinks that if they can destroy capitalism, they can destroy Christianity? You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
this is, I don't, we are so busy focusing on so many things. And when you talk to Christians, they will not have, they will defend capitalism when it is attacked, but they don't see it as a charging point to the Christian worldview either. And I think that's problem. I'm thinking that's really problematic, that there are a lot of things that are blessings of Christianity
Yeah.
that Christians will not defend because they don't want to make them the gospel. That's their argument. What they neglect to see is that the gospel produces a world that has much blessing, and these are one of the connecting pieces of it. It's not gospel, but is a definite fruit of the gospel. Matter of fact, it's a tree that grows up from the gospel. And so, but in the left, I'm like, why is it that they feel like, so fascism,
Yeah.
another one, these are direct communism, attack directly on capitalism. And it's like, why does the left, while we're having all these arguments and fights over social issues, they want to go right against capitalism and say, man, that is problematic. Why is capitalism such an attack point? I think that's their subversive move. Am I right about that?
I think it is a subversive move. It's a shimmy, you know, they're the yeah, it's a spin move, so to speak.
And I
But
think we're willing to give up some parts of capitalism. I think we're willing to like maneuver Christians, maneuver and manipulate or function and play with capitalism because it isn't a hardcore Christian doctrine.
right, yeah, and it isn't um because but the reason that we think that it's not worth defending is because we don't understand what they're actually attacking. They're called, and they because they're defining the terms, right? So if you find, I one of the things, you know, when I hunt through old books, I love old bookstores. One of the things that I always snag if I can find it is the old, in the 40s and the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you had a lot of pastors that would write against communism, right? They the and we have been convinced that that was a Red Scare thing, right? That the reason that everybody was so upset was because that there was some sort of mass psychosis Red Scare thing that happened, and everybody wanted to fight communism, as because it was this bugbear, this it was the Baba Yaga that was sneaking up on us in the dark, which, you know, you still got to let me know if you're coming up for John Wick 4, the true Baba Yaga. But anyway, that's a whole another
I got to figure
thing.
that one out.
You got to figure that one out, because you got to see it on the big screen with the big. I'll buy your ticket. But what you have is what they actually though were arguing was Marxism is a move away from a Christian metaphysic. a Christian metaphysic in which the generosity of God has given us this place, and it's our job to
Mm.
garden it. It's our job to bring it to its intended end. It's our job to multiply resources that we find, because it's a multipliable. The world is a multipliable place, right? Because it is founded on the overflowing love of the triune God, right? That is the grounds of reality. That the triune God is the grounds of reality, right? That everything grows out of that, or rests upon it, or exists because of it, or right, that we don't that we our existence is dependent upon the non-dependent reality of God's nature,
Mm.
who is triune, unchanging, overflowing with grace and
Infinite.
love and mercy, infinite,
Yeah.
and we are finite, dependent. But the kind of place that God made is a place where you've got treasures hidden and treasures multipliable, right? Uh, Marxism says uh, that this place is a place of limited resources, a fundamental rivalry, and that the rivalry is over resources, and that somebody has to be taken from, and somebody has to be the taker, somebody has to be the taken from. So the fight against Marxism was not. It was a fight for a definition of reality. That was how it was originally seen, right? So capitalism is the summary, is as a summary statement, is was originally a defense of a metaphysic, not a defense. So an economic
Whoa.
an economic system that aligns with reality versus an economic system that is posited on top of a different view of reality. So and this is a fight that's gone back, and it's gone under different names, right? So in Calvin's church, that one of their elders um, did a series called that you can still find it out and about. It's called Against Machiavelli,
Oh,
right?
really? Do you remember?
Yeah. Uh, um, so it's I can't remember the name of the elder, but they ended up publishing the lectures that he did, and it's so um because the fountain of that of Marx's view of Marx's metaphysic is the Italian Renaissance philosopher Machiavelli, and the Italian Renaissance went in two directions. One went you had the Dante direction that influences the English world through Chaucer. Um, so, but oh, not Botticelli, but anyway, I can't think of there's a series of poets that end up influence the Italian poets that influence Chaucer, and the Renaissance, the Christian humanist Renaissance is brought into the English speaking church through Chaucer, and it's the eventually the fountain of the Reformation, and the reason being that it restores a lot of uh, the 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 document tradition, or it brings a whole new series of books into the West, um, but it also you begin challenging the supremacy of the Pope. Dante is the beginning of the challenge of the supremacy of the Pope, of the Bishop of Rome as the ultimate authority, um, and that flowers in the Christian humanism that becomes the Reformation. In one direction, there's another side to the Renaissance, though, that is Machiavellian, um, where that posits a different metaphysic altogether, and it flowers in the French Revolution. Um, it but it comes from the same spot, right? And it starts as an argument there during the Renaissance, right, between this new the new learning um, that Machiavelli's trying to argue for, basically that Christianity is a control mechanism of the powerful.
It tries to reframe what
Tries to
Christianity is.
reframe Christianity, what Christianity is. And so he says, unless we can get rid of Dante, who makes it beautiful to who makes this control mechanism beautiful, and convinces everybody that everything has a nature and an intended end, we won't be able to dislodge society from the grip of Christianity. And so that because once you do that and you gather enough power into one place, then humanity will have control over reality. So he's kind of now all of our technocrats, the futurist movement, a lot of them are just kind of the end of Machiavelli. If we get powerful enough, we can literally overcome death. We can all that stuff is there embedded in Machiavelli. Marx is the popularizer, because Marx is the popularizer of that Machiavellian metaphysic, under the name of socialism, communism, and fascism, as what they defined as the center, the left, and the right. But everything, they say this, they try to push the spectrum down to just these three options. So if you're to the right, you're a fascist. If you're to the left, you're a communist. But if you're in the center, you're just a socialist. They're the neutral. And to reframe the argument that way, it is a way of, and capitalism is pushed off of the spectrum altogether because it depends on a different metaphysic. So as Christians, the defense should be of the metaphysic, because capitalism is the fruit that grows from that. And capitalism is just the fruit that grows from that tree. It can be a helpful shorthand to say, I'm a traditional capitalist or something like that, because they even now what they call what is actually fascism, they often will call capitalism. They say, oh, it's crony capitalism. Well, that's just fascism, right? That's you're trying to put capitalism onto your spectrum. Your spectrum is not aligned with reality.
But when you see someone who is a crony capitalist, which is, like you say, fascist, you should see a broken metaphysic.
Exactly, right? We should say, well, that's not the way the world works. Which is why when they come along, it's the same with the.
How do you argue that though? So
critical theory is based on the same metaphysic, which is why they train as Marxists,
right?
Because it's all the same metaphysic. How do you argue with it? Well, there's a couple ways you argue with it. One, you say, it sounds to me like you think rivalry is fundamental and has to be there.
Could you?
I ask a lot of questions. That's all.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. So then, because I see when people figured out that people were using critical race theory, when the right, let me say this better, when conservatives and the right started hearing about critical race theory and they understood what it was, the way that they argued against it was, hey, that's critical race theory, as if that had enough power to say, oh, you're right, let me stop using it. Right. It doesn't. Calling somebody, oh, that's a rear naked choke, doesn't make them say, oh, man, you got me. Right? I'll stop using it. They're like, you're right, now go to sleep. Yeah. Right? And that's how conservatives argue. And so there's a couple of different things, because I think the way that you argue with the left versus you argue with the right is two different things. I think you have more of a baptism to pull conservative people by than you have with the left. So then your questions become, you don't believe in a zero-sum game, do you?
Yeah,
right.
That's where I start. But because here's how I've heard a lot of conservatives say, hey, you're saying this is about race. This isn't about race. This is about money. Like, oh, you're still Marxist. This is about this is about the haves and the have-nots. This is not about race. You're still losing, right? Because that's still Marxism that says that the rivalry is not between black and white. The rivalry is between the rich and the poor. Is you're still on their spectrum.
Right. So you're saying these aren't racial issues. These are social issues, right? These are economic issues.
Economic issues, right? All you say,
Sure.
no. I mean, that's the game I don't play, right? These are human issues, sin and redemption issues. There's are these people acting like Adam and Eve in the garden or out of the garden? Are these people? Is this a Cain and Abel story, right? But so for me, it's you got the story wrong. You're in this is a different story. You're telling a different story than is what's really going on, and that's how I try to or try to argue is, well, I don't think I don't think you're telling the same story that you're seeing. You're not relaying to me the story that you're seeing. Here's the story as I see it. The reason
in order to be able to have that argument, though, you have to have. This might be a plug for the conference, October 11th through the 14th, or 11th through the 16th. But you have to have a very strong understanding of creation to be able to make that kind of argument.
Yes. Oh,
you have to have a really rich knowledge of God and creation.
Yeah, and this is why, I don't have any problem fighting for the first 3 chapters of Genesis as historically accurate, right? Because that is where the argument. That's where the argument is.
Always
right?
Has been.
It always, that and why I think that I know that within a small sliver of conservative Presbyterian and Baptitarian world, there's arguments about the second coming, right? So that and why I'd go to the stake over the physical second coming of Christ and the physical judgment of all things, the restoration of all things, the resurrection of the just and the unjust. Go to the stake for all that.
Yeah,
like I would rather be burned alive than deny it. The reason is because that's the frame narrative of reality. So without it, you don't just lose a little bit, you lose the whole cake, right?
Yeah.
You don't, you're not, so when people say, so like when people say, man, I think, I don't know. I think gay marriage is probably fine. I say, do you know what kind of health problems sodomy causes? And they say no. Then I would be careful to say that until you know what kind of health problems sodomy causes.
Right.
Right. That, and just leave it at that. Right. That's my argument is reality disagrees with you. Now,
so that's go ahead.
So now I understand that because of the scriptures, but I also believe that the scriptures are true all the way down to reality, right? so what's and so there's a rhetoric question, and then there's a so if somebody says, why do you believe that? I can explain from the scriptures. The book, I think the book of Leviticus is really helpful on this. When you understand the book of Leviticus presents homosexuality as an attack on the image of God, or an abomination against the image of God, right? So you are, so
and there should be evidence of that laying around everywhere.
Yeah. But the question that you ask, should, if your shouting matches don't change minds,
right?
Asking the kind of question that a person can't answer within their worldview does at least open up the possibility of a changed mind, right? And so if it's changed minds that we're after, we've got to think in terms of
You,
story, rhetoric,
you know,
rhetoric and story. Are there aspects of reality that do not currently fit into the narrative you're telling? Right. And if we know what those are, then we can
there
ask those
is
questions. And because it's also a compassionate way to say it, right? Why do it's not it's not because I think, you homosexuals are gross that I want them to stop. I think it's bad for them.
and it's
Right.
gross.
I right. But
Right. But that's not the foundational
that's
reason. Yeah.
that's not a good argument, right? Because that's
Right.
an argument from my emotional response. Um, and the
Those are good too, though. I mean, I like those arguments. Right. Just
do
in the
do
same
you think it
way,
changes people's minds?
um, I think a beautiful woman does.
Yes. No, that is totally true.
See what I
That is
did? I just
totally
did one of your moves. I just did
true.
one of your moves. I just did it. Can I just want to say, no, I actually, seriously, I did. I thought about you when you were thinking about, like, what would Jason say here? No, there is an argument from beauty, which is why Dante had to go.
Yes.
Beatrice was that argument,
Beatrice is that argument.
right?
Yeah.
And the reason I get so upset about makeup brands is because they take away the natural beauty of a woman and they make it so easy that a man can do it just by putting on some powder and color,
Right.
right? And so I hate them because they're trying to shroud real beauty,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying that you can't use those things to enhance what's there, but the way that they use makeup now, you got to go 6 or 7 coats below, and it's like a woman's glory is not to be covered like that. That
Right.
she's beautiful, right? And we need to let that be seen. And the more that men do things, they give their glory to their woman, and she shines. That's
Right.
why marriage is important, is because a man's glory is to be given to his wife, right?
Yeah.
And she takes that glory and multiplies it. Go ahead.
Well, and I think I think the real argument is the fruit of the womb is the reward, right? I mean
Message.
that's the real argument, is a historical argument. I mean, this is
Fruitfulness.
one of the things that amazed me about all these men that had been dislodged from their pulpits, is they had committed to training the next generation of preachers. That's what this place did, right? Because they actually, and for some of them, it was a conviction they came to by being removed from the pulpit. That they came to understand the power they came to understand the power of the Word of God to recreate by it being taken away from them. So some of them, but they said, so we need to train up a generation. So we that looks at the pulpit and says, "Hey, let's go fix the world. The Word of God will let's go rebuild the world with the Word of God." And
That's what I was
so
gonna say. Yeah.
it's that long-term historical argument. The long-term historical fruit is the argument in
I
both those situations.
I don't think something else I'm learning with my kids. We were doing family worship, and I can't remember if it was Proverbs. Yeah, we were talking about the fear of the Lord, and this lovely book recommended by David Reese, Proverbs and Politics. Everybody needs to get this book, Proverbs and Politics. Oh my goodness. It's so good, but he deals with the foundation of wisdom as being the fear of the Lord. And then he goes on in Psalms and it says that, one of the things that we do is there's like 3 things we do, is we believe the scriptures, we submit to the scriptures, and we revere the word of God, right? So that we have knowledge and understanding. Because and as I was working through this with the kids, I was like, don't forget, this is the word that made the world. You are part of that creation. You are made up of words. That's what I'm telling my kids. So this is why you don't backbite each other, right? You back talk and you're made up of words. And so when we're witnessing and we're arguing with people and we're using rhetoric and logic, these aren't just systems. What we're trying to do is rebuild through words that God has given us humanity. This is the Christian humanist project. These people who are broken are made up of bad words right now. They are trying, they're eroding, and we need to use the word to rebuild them so that they get regenerated, right? And it's the word. So using right words with a good attitude and heart to go after and save one is the project,
Right.
right? And because they're made up of words, and so there isn't anything else that's going to get them restored except the word. And that's what we're trying to reason with them. And we have the word from creation, and we have the word specifically from the revelation of the word of God that are a perfect harmony. They're not two separate things. They're one. It's a hammer on the left side of the hammer and the right side of the hammer, right?
I think it's the hammer and the anvil.
There we go.
Yeah.
And we use those in our as we're talking to people, which is why it's so important. It's like, okay, what's the right words? That's what, what are the right words to use? That's what I'm asking. What's the right questions to engage with? Because we'll take a system, and I'm precept all the way through. Don't get me wrong, but we'll take the system of precept, and instead of using that system for us to understand what right words to use, we'll use that system on them as if they're going to get right with the system. It's like, no, like, you gotta, that's for you. Precepts for you so that you develop the right words to use in the conversation, and appealing to reality and those things.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Here's a good example, right? So, I once sat down on a plane, and the guy next to me said, he ordered a vodka tonic, and then he tried to pay with cash. And they were like, "Oh, we can't take cash." And I was like, "Oh, I got it. I'll pay for your drink," because he didn't have a card, and so I paid for his vodka tonic. And then he said, "Thanks so much." He says, I said, "Oh, what do you do?" He said, "Oh, I'm in sales." And he said, "What do you do?" And this was back when I was a pastor. And I said, "Oh, I'm a pastor." And he said, "Oh, I'm addicted to pain medication." I was like, "Excuse me?" He said, "I'm addicted to pain medication."
I was this is going to be a long flight.
All right. So tell me about this. And he's like, "Well, I'm in sales, and I wasn't good at it because I was nervous. And my cousin gave me a hydrocodone and said, take one of these before you go in. You'll be so relaxed you can sell anything." He said, and it worked. And so I started taking one before every time I went into sales. And then I started taking them when I wasn't on sales. And the next thing you know, I went to prison because I was trying to buy hydrocodone under the bridge. So I spent a month in jail. And when I got out, yeah,
not that he's trying to buy it, that the jail system was stupid.
Yeah, he said, when I got out, I thought, okay, good. At least now I'm clean. He said, but the cops had not found the hydrocodone that was in the pocket of his jacket, and so he immediately got back on it. And,
oh wow!
And he said, and so I'm addicted. And I said, I don't think you got an addiction problem. You've got an idolatry problem. Why do you think you made that sale? Who provided that sale to you? And he was like, well, I was so relaxed on the pill. I was like, yeah, so you think the pill is your provider? That's thinking anything but Jesus for that sale is idolatry. You need to say, thank you, Lord, for that sale. The God has been providing for you. It's not the pills that have been giving you those sales. Jesus has been giving you those sales. And you haven't been saying thank you because you've been focused on this pill as if it's the provider. Right. Words.
You just need wait. Yeah, I just did this. Everybody needs to take that and apply it across the board to every sin.
Right.
I mean, every last one of them, every sin, everywhere that you find yourself in worry over your job, as if that thing is providing for you. In worry over your relationship. It's the same thing with sexual desires for people who aren't married. God will provide for you. He has been providing for you. He will. The same thing with pornography. That is not your provision. You just apply it across thieving and stealing, skimming from the top at work. It's not. God has been providing for you. You haven't been saying thank you. And you think that you are. Oh, it's so good. Anyways, apply it to everything.
I learned that from an Assemblies of God pastor. Who's a good friend of mine.
Oh, they can't know
Who,
Jesus. They speak in tongues
well,
and stuff.
he um, I went into the hospital once and I called him and I was like, "Hey brother, can you preach for me this Sunday? I'm in the hospital." And he's like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "I'll just preach the sermon I'm preaching." So and then I listened to it later in the week, what he preached. He just preached on he said, "Idolatry. What is it?"
Mm.
And that was his sermon. It was fantastic. It's like anything that you um anything that so God provides, he provides for us, he protects us, and uh and he gives us our identity, right?
Mm.
Provision, protection, identity, and salvation. Anything that we trust in besides Jesus for our provision, identity, protection, and salvation.
Salvation.
And so he said Jesus gives us all those things, and I was like, man, that's brilliant. Right. And so the you've got that, and that has just become something that God sort of dug down deep within me, and now it's I
It's just a
think about
part
a
of
lot
you.
of things that way. Yeah.
That's really good.
Really, really
That's
grateful for that, brother.
really good.
And the the but yeah, in evangelism, I mean, that's the question I always ask is, what's the idol? How do you just point them away from the idol and to Jesus? Right. That's how you do evangelism with people and not with ideas. We tend to evangelize ideas rather than people.
Man, you better preach. You better preach. Ideologies.
Yeah.
We've got them we've convinced them. This is part of the problem with our major apologetics is that we've convinced them that the thing is wrong, but now they go find a different idol.
Yeah, exactly.
The problem is I got the wrong idol. I'll
I
be
got the
right
wrong
back.
idol. If I can find the right idol, he will provide for me.
Right.
And I think that's it's just one. It's one of those things that it's like a lot of things. It's an art form. It's not a science. Science in the modern sense. It's an art form, and you just learn to, and you start by doing it to yourself.
I was just gonna say it.
What are some of the things that I'm getting my identity from besides Jesus? Right, primary identity. There's all sorts of secondary identities that are not idolatrous. It's just the way God told your story. But you want to be telling the same story about your life that God's telling with your life.
Some of the places I've been able to identify really easily is like, where do I worry at?
Yeah.
Like when I sit down, I'm like, oh, I'm worried about this. Is like, hey, I'm being faithless. I have an idol here. Something's going on. I don't trust God here. You know what I mean? And so that's really been clear. So I want to ask those pastors that were in that monastery, did they ever say what they wish they would have done in the process? Did they ever say, or could you glean it now that they? Here's what I'm going to set up, because I want to talk about what they wish they would have done in the process, and then now that we're under attack and the capitalism under attack, how should we then respond? Because those two things I think parallel really well.
Yeah, I only talked at length to a couple of them. One of them, he said, "I wish I would have understood the power of the pulpit when I was in it."
Oh, shut up.
So
he would have preached on it.
Yeah, he would have preached on it. So but he was promised conversation would come, and so just hold off. Well, let's have a conversation. And so he didn't preach
on
some of those things, because he was promised a conversation, and then he was removed from the pulpit and never got the conversation.
Don't preach on it.
Was like, and so he said, and so that was one guy. He was an older gentleman in his late 60s. And he just said, "I wish I would have understood the power of the pulpit when I was in it."
Okay, so then with that said, that's one. So then just taking that conclusion, we need to have a more, I guess the question I'm asking and some statement I'm making at the same time is, our process needs to be that of preaching the complete worldview, the biblical metaphysic, so that when we see things like fascism or the attack against capitalism, we understand it not as a singularity entity that's attacking one thing, but a whole worldview, because that's how the other side sees it. And so we need to preach a biblical metaphysic all the way down to individual economic business transactions. Is that right?
The touches that as if this world is made by God, and so it's touched. Everything is touched by His word.
Amen.
So,
Come on now.
yeah. So,
Come on now.
I mean, one of those gentlemen, I heard him. He got a chance to speak to a group of young preachers, and I was in the group of young preachers that he was speaking to, and he stood up and he said, "This." He was holding his Bible. This is light. Your job is to shine it into the darkness. That's what preachers do. He said, you are preaching into a world.
He gonna make me cry. My goodness, have mercy.
So you're preaching into a world that is made by the word of God and will be remade by the word of God. If you preach it, or when you preach it, when you preach the word of God.
Come on now.
Right? And this is an old Episcopalian who's saying, let me tell you what your job is in the pulpit. Go remake the world. And the scripture. So the scripture and the scriptures have the power to do it, right? Go, and you think this is a guy that he gets the long-term, that this is a long-term play, right? And he preached passionately to about 9 young preachers, because that's about what they could get to head out into the that Anglican Episcopalian world. If you're saying, hey, we're the ones that don't ordain women, like, you don't get very many people recommended to your seminary if in that situation, because you're saying, let's go win back the American Episcopalian Church, right? That's a long-term play, if it's possible at all, right? It could all go into the ground, and that, who knows? But he knows that the job of a preacher is to go remake the world. You're not doing that by works, I'll tell you that. You do that by faith.
Which is exactly how Adam had to walk out of the garden. Right?
You're right. You're absolutely right. But I mean, think of all,
even in the beginning, before the fall, right? He had to do it by faith. He had to believe, like, I'm supposed to take the whole world and make it like this.
Right.
All right, Lord.
Think of all of the church growth movements of the 80s and the 90s, and the let me give you the system. Hey, have you counted your parking lot spaces? Because you got to have the right number of parking lot spaces if you're going to be a growing church. And if you don't have the right number of parking lot spaces, then you're not going to grow. Yeah. What's your ratio of empty seats? What's your greeting like at the front of the church? All those are the things that they spend their time focusing on in the church growth movement. If we don't look around now and say, well, that was bankrupt, right, then we haven't been paying attention, because it was pretty bankrupt. And it didn't help. It didn't work. I know there were people that were saved through that. And so I'm not discounting all of that. But as a movement, it was a works-based movement. It was a sociological, and the fountain of our works were sociological, were the social sciences, sociology. And so this is going to be the
that's
secret.
Hybels and all those guys too. Like, that was sociological setup. Yeah, absolutely.
The move away from the gospel in the 10s, 20s, 30s was a move towards psychology. It was also a social science. Switching the social science is not what we need to do.
But that was a metaphysical move too, though.
They were both metaphysical moves, right? That one was a psychology is going to be the thing that's
the God that saves you,
saves the church, right? So psycho and all the psychoanalytical movements were in their heyday. It was a worldliness. It was the same time that Freud and then Carl Jung were taking off, and Um, but you had the same sort of thing going on, that sociology was at its heyday, really, in those 70s, 80s, 90s, and the church just bought into it, right? And marketing, the market. So the marketers were all starting to use sociology, and we said, hey, and so can you.
And that's why
The,
all the
the
sermons are
church,
like your best life now. Just split off from
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, and you had men that meant well and that I think loved the Lord that bought into it,
Right.
and you had hucksters as well. But they would do a survey of the neighborhood. What are the things that are important to you? Oh,
Yep.
financial management. Okay, we're going to do a sermon series on financial management. We're going to bring financial managers up front, and they're going to give you tips and tricks on financial management, and then we'll invite you to join a small group, and you'll get the gospel there. Um, or not, because maybe you need to get to the miniature small group before you get to that, or but that you go after the felt needs of the people. The word of God creates a desire for itself.
Mm.
When you preach it,
Right.
people that don't know they want it start to want it. People that don't know they need it begin to need it, right? It creates its own audience because it's got the recreative power of the Holy Spirit. It's in the hands of the recreative power of the Holy Spirit. Lazarus doesn't normally come back from the dead. You don't sociologically or psychologically plan for resurrection. Um, Jesus speaks, and Lazarus comes forth from the tomb. We preach the word, and we expect resurrection because the power of God, the God himself, the Holy Spirit, who raised Jesus from the dead, who raised Lazarus from the dead, who created everything by his power in the first place through the spoken word of the Father, who is Jesus, is there with us, promises to be. And so the tool, that when the word of God is a tool in his hand, it's a resurrecting tool. It creates its own hearers.
Jason, it's not like we haven't had these stories told to us.
I know.
Can these dead bones live?
Right.
Right? We know this story.
We
Speak to
do.
them. Right? Like
Yeah.
but we don't, we've forgotten how to engage. We don't believe it. We just don't
Right.
believe them.
I mean, Ezekiel 37 was is my it's secretly my life passage. I think about it all the time, right? Because um and now, having seen the evidence of it throughout the opportunities that I've had to preach the gospel, it's amazing, and just knowing enough faithful ministers, that you realize it's like that everywhere, right? The gospel preaching ministers, they see dead bones get up and dance,
Right.
that they see people get lost and accidentally end up in church and get saved, right? Like they're not even sure why they're there. The and that's it's just something that God is doing all throughout the world, and when you're preaching, then he's doing it there. So
Uh,
why would you not?
so then, okay, I interrupted you. Are you talking about one of the guys you were talking to? The other one, did he have any thoughts of what he felt like
Um,
he should?
well, the other one, he just said, I shouldn't, when they said, hey, let's talk. Well, let's have a conversation. We're just trying to get a conversation going. He just said, I just should have said no. No, I'm gonna be just preaching over here. I'm not interested in having the conversation. Right. So it's this, I'm because it's not a tenable argument that you're making. Um, and so here's the other thing, though, is a number of them that I talked to, because I basically, and when I heard this had gone on, because have a social disorder, I think, and I don't feel awkwardness. I was like, can everybody just tell their story? And so everybody went around the dinner table, and some of them hadn't heard one another's stories. They knew it had kind of
Oh
happened,
wow, yeah.
um, but what one of the guys that got a lot of head nods. He was like, "Look, I know I don't know everything," and so when they said, "Well, hey, can we just have the conversation? Let me say why it is that I think that I think we should start ordaining women, and then you can have a chance to say your part next." I, he said, "I wanted to be humble because I know I don't know everything, and so I thought, well, let's see, let's listen, let's hear their arguments out. Who knows? I could be wrong." Um, and a lot of them were like, "Yeah, I had the same thought. Like, who knows? I could be wrong. I'm willing to hear it out." He said, "Now that I look back and realize that they weren't being honest, I wish I wouldn't have said yes. Let's have
How
that."
but how do you
Right.
know in that moment? That's not
I
as
know it is.
clear.
It is. It's so hard.
You
Um,
have to you have to first make a conclusion that this person is being nefarious, right?
yeah, that they're being nefarious, or that this is. They didn't have the benefit of that we have of knowing the end of that road, which is the homosexuality, the
But they did.
transgender fluidity.
I mean,
It's
they had
19,
an
1963,
yeah, but
1960,
but
right?
yeah, they just came out of Germany. They just came out of, like we are reading the same things that they just got done experiencing. It's like somebody saying,
Yeah, I think you're right. Although,
it's
but
like it's like saying we had no idea in 2023 they would attack us with airplanes. We just
I
experienced 9/11 20 years ago. You know what I mean? So I
I
don't
think no,
have
I think that's true. I
you're
also think
you're being
um
nice.
I am being nice, but I also think like for a lot of them, like these were the guys that were like they're trying to fight um they're trying to fight racism, right? Which is right in front of them. They're trying to like they have fights on their hands. Um and so they're not thinking like, oh, somebody's trying to do an end run and take over the denomination.
Well, they have communism in every aspect of the culture. I mean, they just went through it with Disney. They see the subversive moves that are going on and have been going on since the 20s. They know the worldview has changed in the early turn of the century. I mean, at that point, you have to, I'm sorry,
I
I'm
think
listening.
no, I think you're right. I think we should learn from what they didn't see.
Right,
I also
right,
think um,
right.
that
It's easy
it's
to be arrogant
important.
in this point.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
careful. That's good.
I think
That's
it's
good.
important to look and say these guys these guys stood and they lost, and we're going to honor that. You know, when the opening of the Nicene Council, you had the uh, um, you had the Caesar. Um, uh, why can't I think of his name? The He was the Caesar that converted to Christianity.
Constantine?
Um, Constantine, yeah,
Yeah.
Constantine. He brought up one of the pastors that had had his eyes removed for
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and he kissed him on each eye and he kneeled in
Yep.
front of him,
I remember
right?
that.
Um,
I mean, hearing about it.
yeah,
Wasn't there.
yeah, and I think that Constantine's the emperor. It was his office that had done this to this man, and so he
Right.
brought him up and he said, "This man stood and lost." And but we need to he stood for a losing battle, and he was the one who lost on our behalf, and so we're still here because he was willing to stand in a losing battle. And I think there's some of that, men that got removed from their pulpits because they wouldn't just say, okay, I'll go along with it. um,
Mm,
there's honor in that, even if they didn't see the whole play that was being run
right.
on them. They didn't
That's
understand
good.
what was going on. They stood and they said, no, I won't actually ordain a woman. Right? Because it was the refusal to lay hands uh, on 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 a woman that's getting ordained that got them removed. So even if they didn't see the whole play, right? They were like, except I wouldn't, and that was part of the question that eventually it came to is if we all are decided to ordain a woman, would you join in and help us? No,
Well,
I
yeah, I
wouldn't.
mean, yeah, that's well, and I think we had multiple options and probably end here, but if you just look at the church and the pandemic and watch what they did, like they were compromised so much that the issue of laying hands on a woman was so far downstream. Like they closed their doors.
Right. Yeah.
Like
But,
so,
and
whatever you want to say about these guys, you know what I mean. Like, but you shut your doors.
right. Well, that was even, because I know even in the midst of the pandemic, you had people that were like, look, I actually don't know. I'm not sure what's going on. What I
Yep.
know is people that show up to worship Jesus, you don't say go home to, right? They're like, so I
Well,
don't know
we
everything that's going on. I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about the vaccine. I don't know what to say here. What I do know is I'm confident that when it's Sunday morning and it's time for worship and people are going to show up, you don't say, hey, go home, right? You say, oh, good. I'm glad you're here. We all come in and we worship God on Sundays. That's what I know. And so we're going to do that. We'll figure everything else out. And so if those folks that did that you don't say, yeah, but what you didn't see coming was this, you say, okay, with what they were confident in, they stood,
right,
right? They stood, and
right.
you honor that.
That's
And
good. That's how you honor
uh,
your forefather. That's really
yeah, you
good.
honor your forefathers in that way. And then and say thank you for doing that. Because that means there is one Episcopalian seminary still that won't let women in to the
Right.
MDiv, right? Like there's one that stood and said, no, men and women have different roles. We don't put women on the front lines.
Doggone it, had a pronoun fight back then.
Pronoun fight, isn't that crazy?
I mean, we don't. Oh, man, I still think there's a lot of meat on this bone with fascism and capitalism. I don't think that we're done having this conversation. We didn't even get a chance to get to the poem that you wrote, but
Yeah.
I am seeing that we are letting the Republican side argue for capitalism and conservatives who are compromised, like the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, and those guys, argue for capitalism and sex and all this stuff like that, while the church is kind of saying, well, while these have implications of God, this is not our fight is different in this. And so we don't preach the word of God all the way down to the bone where it touches capitalism and deals with the metaphysical because actually fascism and communism are attack against created order.
Yeah.
They are Trinitarian heresies.
And I think that's what we I mean, I don't think you ever have to mention capitalism from the pulpit. I mean, I think
Sure.
you can. I don't think that's a problem, but I don't think you have to mention it from the pulpit to be defending. I think we just defend reality, right?
Right.
We defend
absolutely
the generosity of God. I mean, generosity is not.
But Jason, you know,
in a bureaucratic metaphysic.
I want to challenge that a little bit. The way people are so broken down with their understanding, their lack of literary wisdom, the lack of their poetic understanding, I don't think that we know how to put two and two together the same way we probably once did.
That's probably true, but I also think the goal is not to restore capitalism.
No, I'm not trying to make it the goal. I'm talking about the metaphysical construct and fight that is in there that people aren't engaging with, right? And I don't think they see it that way. And so,
I think you're right. I think you do have to be explicit about the created order that God I think we need more. I mean, I think we need sermons on the Trinity. Let me explain.
Right.
We need sermons on what does it mean that a triune God created this place out of the overflow of his generous love. What does it mean that we need those sorts of sermons that are metaphysical sermons
and that deal with economics, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about house law. That's all the scriptures are dealing with. Is you're loving God is the right. That's part of the law. And then loving your neighbor. Well, what does that look like then?
Yeah.
For
I
one to
mean, I
really
think,
love their neighbor well.
which is why I think it's important that you preach books of the Bible from beginning to end, because then you can't avoid the economics. Because it's, I mean, and actually preach about every verse, right? You could skip
Right.
verses to avoid the economics, but God talks about economics quite a bit. It's he doesn't shy away from it, because economics. I mean, we tend to think, I think, that economics is a dirty thing, but
Or it's
instead,
something secular. We
or
think
it's
it's
something
secular.
secular, yeah. But instead, God set up an economic world so that we could show love and exchange value and add value to one another's lives and multiply value, in the world, and so that we could be generous,
Right.
right?
So we can act like the Trinity.
We can act like the Trinity, right? So that we can have more than we need, so that we can give to one another. We can have less than we need, so that we can receive from one another, right? He set up a world in which generosity is possible because of the fluctuations of economics, um, so that we could reflect him, right? Because God is both the giver and the receiver within the triune, generosity. And so there are times when you don't have enough and you need to be blessed by the deacons fund, and then there are times when you have more than enough and you can give to the deacons fund, or you can take care of your neighbor, or you can, you can gather together and get the single mama car, and all those things that are good things to do. Sometimes you're on the receiving, sometimes you're on the giving end. Either way, you can reflect God in that moment. uh, and that's a fundamental biblical economic. Work hard with your hands, quit stealing, work hard with your hands, so that you can be generous to one another.